So this is a project-based class where we want you to go out and actually capture content from a shot list that we provide you. I've been fortunate enough to work with brands and magazines to shoot campaigns for them. And typically these are the type of photos they're looking for. Your shot list consists of 4 shots: street portrait, look up, motion blur, night photography. Some things that I try to avoid when I'm out shooting street photography are things that are very touristy, things that are fake. So I try not to shoot big brand stores or locations or streets that have nothing but stores on them where people are carrying shopping bags. I'm looking for places that are very, once again, just authentic to that city. So once you have your 4 shots, I want you guys to log on to Skillshare and upload your class project. And I really want to see these in sets of 4. I want to see it in order, from street portrait to look up to motion blur to night photography. I want you guys to give each other feedback and really showcase to each other what your city is all about, the life of your city. Along with you guys, it's time for me to go capture my project. So this is a street portrait I took in Chicago on LaSalle Avenue. I was working on a Nike project actually. The same way she's walking, I had about 6 runners running across in between lights changing. She was on the end of that walk when my runners had already passed. But I had been standing there for probably a good 30 to 45 minutes. So this is like another classic example of just like holding my ground, becoming part of the location where she wasn't even noticing that I was there. I think my favorite thing about this shot is her stride. I know you can get photos like this all the time, but the way she's walking to me, it's a real hustle. Like she's got somewhere to go, and it just really translates in the photo. I think that the other thing that I love about it is that her head falls right underneath the clock of the Chicago Board of Trade building. I think that's just like a small little detail that I love, along with just the image being completely full. There's no tops of the building, and you really get this vanishing point leading all the way to the Chicago Board of Trade. I shot the street portrait in Istanbul. I was actually shooting the location itself. This is kind of a famous location in Istanbul in a neighborhood called Balat. Just these rows of painted houses. It's kind of famous there. So I was taking photos of that, and I saw this old man walking up, and I just thought it was really intriguing. One, he just looked like somebody from Turkey. Another thing that I really liked about it is that he had this cane, and he had a really slow walk, and he was just walking up this big hill. And you could tell it was going to take him a long time, and that he was taking his time. And I just felt like it was just a classic, beautiful moment. You can tell he walks this hill every day, but it doesn't bother him at all. This was taken in Istanbul as well. I love this shot. I felt like she actually went and got a second bag after I was beginning to take her photo the first time, and I felt like she actually went and got a second bag just so I could grab her photo. But I loved everything about her. I loved the way her shirt went into her hands. I always thought that was interesting when I was taking her photo. But I also loved the way her scarf around her head pops against the black on her body. But the location itself is gorgeous with all those birds, the texture on the floor from the food. It's just a really authentic photo to Istanbul and to Turkey. So this was taken in India in just a small alley. I was walking around taking photos, and it's amazing how open they were to having their photo taken. I felt like they know, just as a culture, how vibrant, authentic, and real their lifestyle is. And they're really comfortable with it. So I think naturally they're just comfortable with photographers walking around and taking their photo. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to look. I've gotten a ton of looks, and even though they're looking pretty stale and mean mugging, they're quite content and just normal looking, just giving me a strong stare to the camera. And I think that is better than a smile. I think it shows that they're still themselves even though I'm taking that photo. They didn't change anything for me. And as a photographer, I can really appreciate that. This might look like a still moment, but there was probably 10 people waiting just to pass by me to get into this little tight area where there's already tons of people. I was definitely blocking the way. But I was blocking the way so no one would get in front of my shot. I was quick. It didn't take me long. But in India, everything is so quick. There's people everywhere. And at this moment, I had to be quick. And another thing that I like about India and about this shot is that I shot this with a 50. I usually always walk around with a 24, whether I'm shooting lookups, portraits, motion shots. I'm usually always rocking with a 24 as my base shot. If I see it in a different way or I know it's going to work in a different way, I'll change lenses. But when I was in India, I stayed with a 50 the entire time. Sometimes I would put a 24 on, but I would immediately change back to a 50. I wasn't able to isolate subjects as well, especially when shooting street portraits. There was so much going on that when I was shooting wide, I wasn't able to get a clear enough depth of field to really isolate someone. So the shots were always coming out extremely busy. But with a 50 and getting really wide open with it, getting really tight, I was able to isolate a lot better. So the next shot we're going to talk about on our shot list is a lookup, which I've been asked by a couple brands to get for them on assignment. It's amazing, like, I never called a lookup a lookup. To me, that was like my shot when I started. That's all I wanted to do, was like shoot lookups. To me, that's like a trash hand shot. I'm constantly looking up, even when I'm not shooting. Walking down the street, driving my car. If I'm downtown or anywhere near some architecture, I'm definitely looking up. And I think the best part about a lookup, too, is that all I really need is an iPhone to get it. I think the iPhone's perfect for lookup shots because it's capturing all this detail without having to worry about your aperture or anything like that. And when you're capturing lookups, you want to capture as much detail as possible. You want your depth of field to be as big as possible because you want to capture all the detail from the sky to the buildings and all the architecture that goes with that. So with an iPhone, it does that automatically. So for lookups, it's perfect. When shooting lookups, I'm looking for mainly three things. I'm worried about the sky, scale, and the detail of the actual building. So this is a shot I took for Chicago Mag that was featured in one of their magazines. It's a beautiful lookup. You can see that I'm using the glass to reflect the architecture to increase the detail. One of the reasons I love this shot is because outside of the glass, on the exterior of the building, there's so much architecture that's happening. There's so much line work. There's this beautiful vanishing point that almost looks like it's forward, but it's actually pointed directly up. And I love that that pattern continues as it's being reflected on the glass. So there's actually like twice as much happening than if that was just brick and no reflection was happening. You get all this extra detail. I think the main challenge for this shot was just getting the line work right. I think another thing was just trying to focus on what was going to be my priority of lining the shot up. If you can see these two middle lines, they're not actually in the very middle of the shot. But if I used that as a middle, I wouldn't have been able to have the vanishing point actually centered. So I made a sacrifice, and I wanted the vanishing point more centered than those two lines leading into it. This shot was taken in San Francisco, downtown. I love this shot. I took this with actually my 14mm super wide, and I had my camera basically leaning on the building. I think I had it pointing up a little bit, but I still wanted my camera as close to the surface as possible. So I actually had the base of it leaning on the building, but just tilted a bit up so I could capture more of the buildings that were behind me and surrounding this one. But if you notice, because I was so close, I was actually able to get a greater reflection. It's one of my favorite lookup shots just because of the cloud formations. I really love the sky. I really love the feeling I get from it. I love that some of the clouds feel so white, but with the edit, if you look in the top left corner, the sky seems as black as night, but the clouds are as bright as day. And I love the buildings that are around it. There's a ton of negative space, but the clouds really fill it in to a point where it doesn't feel empty. It's still a very full shot. And you can see a bit of the clouds reflections in the Sears Tower to the left, also known as Willis Tower, but I don't call it that. It's just an overall beautiful image. But I shot this out of the moonroof of my car. I actually stopped in the middle of traffic. I wasn't there for long. I had to adjust my settings for a quick second, but I just shot this through the moonroof of my vehicle. So now the next shot we're going to be talking about on your shot list is motion blur. And I think when you work with brands that are all about movement, whether it's cars or running, you really have to be able to portray speed, portray movement, and have that be the main element in the shot. There's two ways that I like to utilize blur. One is where I have the moving object appear as they are moving, as a motion, or where I capture that moving object as a still subject, but the environment around it is blurry. Either way, when I'm capturing blur, I do have a slow shutter speed. One is just going to be slower than the other. When I'm trying to capture the environment still and the subject that's moving as a motion, I'm trying to have my camera somewhere that has a base where I can keep it still and leveled. So as the environment stays still, my camera can as well while the subject is moving, capturing that motion. With a slow shutter speed, still keeping a level exposure, I'll be able to capture that movement. Whereas where I'm capturing the object moving as a still in the environment around it as a blur, I'm panning along with the object as it moves with a slow shutter speed, where I can capture that blur as I pan along with the subject. When I capture my subjects as a motion blur, I like to have them a good distance away from me, as I find it easier to capture that blur when they're a bit further away. If they were closer, you have to pan a lot quicker. It becomes a lot more difficult to actually grab that focus and grab that blur, whereas when they're farther, it's a lot easier, and you can have more time to pan with them because they're farther distance away from you. Obviously, a motion blur shot of the car still with the environment around it blurry. You can obviously read that it says Chicago Police on the car. It's definitely readable. One thing that I do like is that the front of the car is actually blurry. The entire vehicle isn't in complete focus, and I don't think that hinders the image at all. I think it still shows how fast this car was actually moving. As long as you can still read what it says, I think you successfully captured the shot. You can't see what it says behind you. It's definitely unreadable on the building behind it. I love that I was able to capture the light, the blue light, and the rush that this cop was feeling. So this is a shot I did for this brand called Dope Boy Magic, based out of Chicago, also known as DBM. In this shot, you have the subject still, but the moving object as a blur. You can see that in the background, the train is obviously moving. Here, I was actually freehand. I was using my leg. To steady my arm to keep my shot as still as possible. I was towards the beginning of the train platform, so this train was passing me by at its quickest pace versus if it was towards the end when it was coming to its stop. I had the model stay as still as possible as he could be. I have actually him holding his jacket in so it doesn't flail around a lot, so it actually stays as clear as possible as the train passes by him. One thing that I really like about this photo is you can actually see the American flag on the right being dragged along with the motion. You can see where I actually began the shot, where the flag is on the left, and see it passing by. The last shot on your shot list is night photography, and how you can adjust to get the 3 previous lessons at night. Night photography is essential to being able to work with brands. It really shows your skill in photography, your knowledge of lighting and how you're able to use and manipulate it. I think at night, it's a completely different atmosphere. I think you'll see a completely different crowd. I think you'll see people dressed completely different, acting completely different. You'll see the lights come on, and I think that offers a whole new world of content for you to be able to capture. Night photography is all about lighting. So when I'm shooting at night, I'm worried about my shutter speed and my ISO. I'm trying to keep a great balance in between that without getting my shutter speed too low and my ISO too high. So if my ISO is too high, I'm going to get some noisy images. With my shutter speed too low and me moving around that quick, I'm going to get some blurry shots, which I don't want. So this is a night shot I took in New York City. I took it in the LES, the Lower East Side. I was just walking, taking photos by myself in New York City, and I had made a right, and I started walking down the street. And as I got midway, I noticed it. And I noticed the car in the foreground and the light that was coming from there. And I just waited about 2 minutes until I really finally had some subject matter that I liked and found was interesting. As for my artificial light, I was using the light that was coming from this grocery store. I thought it was pretty amazing. Everything around it on the rest of the street seemed closed and the lights off, but this grocery store was really bright. Another thing that I really like about it is the way that that light and store was reflecting on the hood of the car in the foreground. I thought that was really interesting. The other thing that I liked was the two subjects, the one that was in the store and one that was actually out of the store walking past. I just found both of them interesting. When you see this shot, you can obviously see that the car in front of me was blurry because of the low light. I have to compensate for it. So not only do I have a low shutter speed and a high ISO, but I also have a low aperture, which is causing that depth of field, which is causing that blur in the foreground. This is classic Chicago at night to me. This is an apartment building in Chicago, a common look to Chicago apartment buildings, symmetrical, nice courtyard, a gate in the front that's obviously blurry, once again talking about my low aperture, giving that foreground blurry because I'm focusing on the building in the background. Obviously I also line that up. If you see that middle spike is coming straight through into the middle of the path. One thing that I like about this is that there's not much light happening, just light that's lighting up the courtyard. It's actually giving it a bit of an eerie vibe. One thing that I added to this to actually manipulate the eye in thinking that it was brighter was that I created a vignette around the image, making the corners darker to bring out the light in the middle of the image without actually brightening, increasing the exposure of the image. We are on LaSalle Street, going to be walking up and down. It's one of my favorite places to walk on during sunrise. It's just a lot of traffic. Most people here are still groggy just from their early morning before they had their coffee, so you can kind of get away taking some street portraits of them, which is my favorite time. When you walk more towards Jackson on LaSalle, you get towards more of the financial area, a lot more banks, so you get a lot more people in suits if you're looking for that, which I usually am, just to get that kind of eerie business vibe with some of the Roman architecture for like the banks and stuff like that. But I really want to use as much architecture as possible and then use my subject to complement all of it and to help compose a shot to tell a story. Here's actually something I love. So I love this architecture right here. I love these lines that are happening and the way it just descends. So I'm gonna probably like frame my shot up like this. But this is something where I could just stand here, hold my composition, and as people come, I can just begin to take portraits of them. And I can just like almost stack up my portraits if I wanted. Guy with the briefcase, wearing a suit, long trench coat. Exactly what I was looking for, telling a story, got character. Being a cityscape photographer, I'm just drawn to the city life and everything that comes with it and those type of vibes and that type of lifestyle. So So I think being downtown, being in the financial district, it just makes sense. You kind of expect that. You don't expect to see just somebody with jeans. I feel like it doesn't really fit. So if you can put the right subject in the right setting as it naturally happens and take a photo of that, I think that just comes off really powerful, but right, you know? Like it just is like an accurate photo. And at that point, I feel like it becomes timeless. You know what I mean? Let's keep moving. It's not that much light out, so I gotta be as still as possible. There you go. That was a tight one. I got to frame up my shot, stay there for a moment, really hold it, my composition. That's how I was able to get him like perfectly right in front of that door, you know? And do the face mask look crazy. All right, I say let's walk across the street and then do the same thing walking back. I think that's the beautiful thing about shooting wide, like with the 35 or even with the 24, is that you get to really like compose your shots. You get a lot more room to like fill in, so you get a lot more to work with. So I feel like every time I'm like shooting portraits or even shooting lookups or anything on the street, I'm always at the edge of the sidewalks, just so you have as much sidewalk room to work with when you're trying to compose your shots. Just waiting for the right person to come into my frame. Hey, this lady. Ooh, I like that lady. Let's see what this guy looks like. Let's keep moving. I think the main thing that I try to do when I'm out here shooting and trying to get these shots of these portraits is that I really try to compose my shots first. I see how I want to capture my shot and let really the subject stroll into the shot and just capture that. So I already know how good my shot has the potential to be. And I'm already happy with it. So once I have it, I can stand still and almost blend into what's happening around me. So no one actually begins to notice me at that point, which allows me to even be able to get more shots in, and to get shots unrecognized, to get more of that candid shot without them knowing I'm taking their photo. Hold up. I like this complete surface. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And you see it's just like this one from floor to ceiling, this one clean surface, and then you just get to isolate your subject and they just stand out so much. For me, I'm even like a real symmetrical photographer. I love shooting symmetry. I love my shots to be clean, to all be lined up, have rule of thirds. I'm not a photographer to just shoot aimlessly. I want my shots to be composed, even though they are candid and they are kind of off the cuff. I still want to have a composed shot. So at this point, I'm just waiting for a subject to come in. I know my composition. I really like this statue, and I think I'm gonna try to compose something here so I can just wait for my subject to come in. I'm gonna take this guy on the right. Yep, got him. I think one main thing to take away though is that you have every right to be out here taking photos. You have every right to be taking photos of these people, portraits of anyone that are walking the streets. If they're out in public, you have the right to take their photo. A crazy person could come up to you and start threatening you, and you might definitely want to delete that. Yeah, stay back real quick, because I'll stay kind of far, because I'm gonna try to get this guy smoking right here. I want him on that exhale.
I like the architecture. I like the vanishing point. I like the subject. I like that he's in a suit. I like the gray hair. I like the vibe of just him reading that newspaper. You can tell that was like something he does every day, you know? It was so authentic to him. And I think that's also really a key factor when shooting street portraits. You want to shoot something that's really authentic. And people feel authentic. They know it. You can't hide it. You can't fake it, I should say. Like, come on, it's one of the most epic lookups in Chicago. So tight. The things that I'm looking for when shooting lookups is trying to capture a negative space, also like height, scale, symmetry, details, maybe reflections into the glass, the brick, and even using those as like composition. I think sometimes it's really interesting putting something that's really old school with brick next to something that's modern and new age, and that's nothing but steel and glass. And I look for all those things when I'm doing a lookup.
Once again, just using the building's lines any way I can to really just compose my shots. You want to see things in a different way as much as possible. Yeah, obviously you want to use the rule of thirds and that type of things for your composition, but like, don't be afraid to explore, try new things, try new angles, try to line them up in weird ways, and just take the photo and see how it works out. You never know until you try.
It's probably one of my favorite lookups in Chicago. This is the Chase building, and the architecture of this building is just so amazing. You can just see it just slants up like that. And I take everyone here who comes new into town just as a lookup, but if you look up, it's just amazing. It's definitely one of my favorite intersections. Using 3 of my favorite lenses that I always have in my bag, a 50, 24, and a 14. I'm going to show you guys the different perspectives you can capture using those lenses for a lookup. Going in order. First was my 50, and my 24. So with the 50, I was only capturing really close to the top of the building. Once I put my 24 on, I'm capturing almost twice as much information. So with this 14, you can see the difference in the glass between the 24 and the 14. How the 14 is really round versus the 24. With the 14, I'm not only able to capture these main buildings, but I'm actually able to capture the buildings all around it, creating a more fuller lookup, but also adding a ton of scale to these buildings. When I'm first shooting, I'm looking for the overall size and scale of these buildings. I want them to feel tall in the photos. And then I'm also thinking about the detail of the building, the lines. If you notice, this building has a bunch of lines, but this actual particular one right here actually matches up with the middle of the building across from it. So you get this really clean, symmetrical photo when you're doing a lookup. What's nice about alleys is that usually both buildings are blocking the sun, so you get this even light no matter what. So I think a great point to make is that I don't need a fast shutter speed to shoot lookups. So I can really lower it, keep a steady hand, and really increase my aperture to capture as much depth of field as possible. I think the beautiful thing about lookups is that you really get to like take your time, line up your shot. The buildings aren't moving, it's a still subject, and you can just get your exposure right, get your angles right, your scale, your perspective, line up your corners. I think one of the easiest lookups is just the corner of a building, especially a square building, because it just allows you for this even symmetrical shot. It's classic easy, but provoking at the same time. It is a great way to show scale. I mean, this is just a beautiful lookup. Match symmetrical, really unique, perfect architecture, great detail, leading lines that take you all the way to the top. The scale is massive. You got buildings around. You can either isolate the building by itself or add other buildings in to add more negative space. I think the really cool thing about lookups too is that you could shoot the same lookup so many different ways to tell it to tell a different story. You could shoot it on a bright blue day and you get this warm weather type feeling. You can shoot it when it's foggy and the top of the building is disappearing into the sky and you have this moody photo. You shoot when it's raining or snowing and you're always gonna get this different type of vibe and different type of feel to it, which is awesome. So at one of the train platforms in Chicago, I'm trying to capture a moving blur shot as one of my shots from my shot list. Here I'm going to try to capture the train as a motion in the environment around it still, but also the train as a still and clear shot, but the environment blurry. Right now I'm using this handrail to help keep my shot as steady as possible. When the train actually comes, it does move around, but I actually don't have a shutter that's that long, so I should be fine. I'm playing with my settings. I don't have a 30-second exposure. It's not a nighttime shot, and I still want some definition from the train. If my shutter's too long, the motion of the blur is going to be way too smooth. Even though I want it to be smooth, I still want some definition to show that it is a train. You can actually see it right here, complete blur of the train as it passed, with the environment perfectly still thanks to that handrail. But I actually like that last clip where you can see the end of the trail and the lights that came with it. I'm trying to capture subject as a still object. Once it begins to come close to me, I'm already locking on to the front of it. And I'm holding that focus, the same focus, as I'm panning all the way across from right to left or left to right. For 1 second, you and the subject align to capture that still moment while everything else is blurry. Here the front of the CTA isn't still, but even the back of the CTA and everything around it is blurry. But I even followed it along, and you see the front is clear, the entire background is blurry. I just found that capturing a motion blur with the subject closer to the camera, I just can't achieve the same result. I think it's a lot harder in my personal opinion. So we're underground trying to capture a motion blur shot of a train. I don't really have anything to use as a base like a handrail or tripod. So I gotta anticipate where I'm gonna be when the train is passing me by as fastest, so I don't have to have that slow of a shutter speed, so I can be handheld, really using my leg as a base to get the shot. So here I got the train passing me by. I know that I'm at the end of this platform, so I know that the train is gonna pass me by at its quickest pace as it arrives. I'm actually gonna be using the floor. You can see that there's a small water puddle happening here. So I'm gonna put my camera on the floor, use the floor as my base to keep my camera still, and get some motion blur shots of this train with a cool reflection happening as well. Actually some monstrous motion blur happening. Really liking this yellow line. But I just kept firing and firing until I found one that I liked. You guys should see the front of the train right here. Some nice light trails happening.
So I'm focusing on the environment. Just focusing on the environment so I can keep that still. Not focusing on the train because that's going to be blurry. And then just take as many shots as I can. So we're here to discuss how to utilize artificial light for street photography. Using the 3 lessons prior to this one, I want you to be able to capture a photo that tells a story using artificial light, whether that be a street portrait, a lookup, or even capturing a moving object. I love this location. It's very authentic to Chicago. It's the L. You even get all the lines that take you where you need to go. But I'm using artificial light from this lamp to get a clear, good shot of my subjects walking up as they're rushing to get home. And even here, I'm not looking for a big crowd to come through. I'm looking more for that one individual that just like tells a story, that feels a certain way, that brings off a certain vibe. It's mad tight. It's like the way that guy was walking across the street. But even see him, you can see that even his upper body is in focus, but his feet are blurry. And that's just because of the low shutter speed at night. It's reacting quick, but still having a steady hand, but at the end of the day, they're moving. It's hard. I find doing the motion blur shots at night a little more interesting because the artificial lights in the background give it more of a texture compared to doing it more during the daytime. If I'm at the red light, I'm definitely trying to shoot cars. If I'm walking, I'm shooting portraits. Take advantage of my time that way. So I actually really like this as a lookup. There's so much light also coming from this lamppost, and I'm using actually that light source without even it being in the photo. There's not much light at all happening above there. Most of the light is happening right below it, right before it gets to the actual wall and goes up. Just adjusting my settings to compensate for the extremely low light that's happening. I'm just raising my ISO to do that, to allow more light to come in and push my camera harder. Things like we went over before when doing lookups, I want to worry about the scale, I want to worry about the sky, and then I also want to worry about the building's details and its lines, and just really showcasing all of that. I missed it. It's too dark. Too dark, I missed it. I missed this plane that was flying above the buildings in between them. It was too dark, I couldn't focus quick enough to capture it. So even after I've gone through and picked my selects, when doing street portraits, I tend to pick a couple selects that are close to each other. It's just so in the end I have a couple options to choose from before I pick my final select. In this shot, an example, you can see these two are just taking immediately right after each other. So when I go to pick it, I can actually see full screen everything that's happening and what I like and dislike about it, so I can pick my final select. For this shot in particular, compare it, this is the first, this is in the second. I like the second a lot more compared to the first. For me, he just fits into this architecture a lot more, filling in this space a lot more neatly compared to the first one. Where his back step is almost at the edge of this line. versus him being completely in the center of it. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on this. If you notice on the right here, there's a bit of an opening from the window, so I'm just going to go ahead and crop a little in. Usually I try to work with the rule of thirds, but for this shot, I actually want the bottom of the ground kind of a little as possible versus the top. I just want to create kind of a tall background of the same type of floor. And once again, when I was shooting it, the thing that attracted me most about this photo was that the floor and the background had the same texture. So my favorite presets to use in Lightroom are the VSCO presets. They have 6 different packs now, VSCO, Film, 01, all the way through 06. That you have to admit, 02 and 05 have some of my favorite presets. Those are the packs that I keep going back to, but I still use presets from 01, 02, 03, 04, even 06. So when I begin editing, I always end up kind of doing the same thing. I do the same thing because this is my style. This is the way I see. This is the way I feel like my photos should come out. This is a representation of my eye, my brand, my photos as a whole, and my portfolio. So I end up kind of picking the same kind of things and then tweaking it for the photo there. While I'm going through the edit, I'm just trying to highlight as much detail as possible, but also have him stand out as much as possible. I'm adding some clarity to really add some definition to the shot, add some definition to him, to really bring him out as that subject in this photo. I also like how dark he is in his attire compared to his background and surroundings. I might actually increase the shadows a little bit to bring some detail from his clothing, from the wrinkles in his jacket, and even the wrinkles in his pants. Along with making sure that your crop is right, you always want to straighten your photos. Just double checking and triple checking that my lines are straight and that this photo is clean. The filter I'm using right now for this photo is a Fuji Superior 1600 Plus in the Film 02 pack of VSCOs. And don't forget to use the presets that go along with your brand of camera. Right now, I shot this with a Canon camera, so I'm using the Canon presets under VSCO Film 02. Usually what I like to do after I have the photo edited in my default style that I think is closest to my vision, I like to actually double click and do a create virtual copy. Once I have that, it's a complete duplicate of the original file. And once I have that, I like to actually play around with other filters and see what I have. One thing I like to do is put down the navigator so I can see the image as a little square. So once I go through these filters, I actually get a preview of what's happening from each VSCO filter. So once I like a type of filter, I go ahead, select it, and begin doing work. I really like the blue in this, and not only how the blue affects the background, but him as a whole. Once again, I'm going to increase my clarity, bring some shadows up, lower my highlights to make sure that my whites aren't blown out and I'm still capturing as much detail as possible. Increase my sharpening a little bit. Make sure my profile correction's on. I don't want a vignette because I don't want my corners darkened. I want this to be an even image all the way around. I want my corners just as bright as the rest of the image. Really just making that subject pop up that much more. One thing that I might do is actually raise this bottom tone curve point to help flatten the blacks just a little bit, as I like to do that in my photos. So here, my default style, and also a new style that I like, just so I can go back and forth and pick a favorite of mine later on. Here's another street portrait shot that I really liked. This is one of my selects from it. This location I stayed at for actually a couple of minutes, about 2 or 3. I waited for my subjects to come into frame. I sat here, held my ground, and just waited for them. I blended in so they didn't even notice. So when I'm picking through selects, I actually have 3, from all the shots that I took, I have 3 favorites. You can see as I go back and forth, same shot, 3 different people who have this same exact stance as they're walking past me. I can just pick whichever one that I like and I feel like fits the location the most. I like this guy the best. I feel like with his jacket and overall vibe, it's just really clean. You know, now that I have an edit that I like using one of the VSCO film presets, I'm just going to copy it, the adjustments, so when I have the next photo that I like, I can just paste it and then kind of adjust towards. So I'm going to make sure that my image is highlighted in the navigator and just begin to go through these filters and pick through which one I like. I chose this filter because I really like how soft and flat the image is overall. I think it just kind of cleans up the image and cleans up the blacks a bit. Going to increase the clarity like normal. Increase the shadows just to bring out some of those flat blacks a little bit more. I like the way they feel, but I feel like it could be a little brighter, but still flat. Going to straighten out this image, make sure everything's level, make sure that my subject is completely in the middle. If I click the corner, like I'm going to straighten it, you get all of the lines of the actual photo so you can really see what's happening and line up your images perfectly. So I'll constantly do that. Even if I'm not straightening it, I'll do it just to double and triple check that my photo is aligned. You can see that the line goes directly through the statue's head and into the body of the man below. If I were to throw this on Instagram, a quick crop, obviously it still picks from the same spot where I cropped last, so I already know that this is perfectly centered, even on both sides here, left and right. Symmetrical image with the subject perfectly in the center, ready to go. So for this part, I'm going to edit my lookup shot using VSCO. I'm going to go through my photo album on VSCO and find the lookup shots that I want to edit. Just picking a couple of my favorites, a couple that I see that are symmetrical, on point, the lines are clean, the perspectives are right. Even from this angle and them being this little, you should be able to see the lines the way you want to see them, leading in the right way, the perspective is right. So even right here, I'm going to actually sync these photos with my iPad using the new VSCO, which is pretty amazing. Just press this sync button and they will actually begin to pop up on my iPad, which is pretty amazing. So here I go, I have all 3 photos that I took with my iPhone now on my iPad using the new VSCO. Extremely simple, extremely easy. So I'm actually just going to go through one by one and edit them. So I'm going to pick the tool button to begin editing. Usually before I actually begin to pick any filters, I like to go through and edit the photo with some tools. One of my things I like to do first, of course, always is straighten the photo. The new VSCO 4, actually, the straightening tool is so much better than it ever was before. It's a lot more fluid, a lot more smooth. You can actually get a lot more precise with it this time. So yeah, right now I'm just worrying about this building here. I want to make sure that these lines are correct, that they're perfectly vertical. One thing that I always like to do is brighten my photos up a little bit, even just by the hair. So now I'm going to go and look through my filters and get all of them here. I of course always go to my favorite filters first, and just see how they look. Of course with VSCO you can adjust the strength of your filter now. So you just play around with it, get it to a level you like. Of course I'm just going to play around, find other filters that I like. You can just go through and spend all day picking filters. Of course when you've used it like I have, you have developed your own personal favorites. But I'm going to go back to F1, bring it down a bit, as I love this filter. Go back to my tool. I always like to, one of the last things that I like to do when editing my photos as the last step before I finalize it, I like to sharpen the image. I only do 1 or 2, I never go more than that. I think at that point you begin to ruin the image by how sharpened it is. But you also have to know that I'm also sharpening this image because I know that it's going to Instagram, and once you upload the photo to Instagram it actually dumbs the quality down, so you're preparing for that final step as well in advance to make sure that the image looks great on all platforms. Sometimes too, right before the end, after the filter has been laid on, I will play around with the color temperature, see if I like any changes in it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and actually save this to my camera roll. And from that same area, you're able to share to your grid, which is amazing, easy to do. The best part about your grid is that you get to curate in a whole new way. The way I curate my grid is I post my best images on there. I even curate it completely different than I do my Instagram. I'm way more selective, which is really interesting. But you can share to your Facebook, Twitter, email, Google, Weibo, which I don't even know what the hell that is. I'm going to go on to my second image here that I took around the same time. Of course, the first thing I'm going to do is straighten. Right here, I'm just trying to pay close attention to the lines, make sure that the lines that VSCO provided me are lining up with the building. So I'm paying attention to this building and this building up here, paying attention to the lines and the architecture, just making sure I got it straight. You're going to see that actually I didn't capture this perfectly down the middle, at least on this side. On this side I got pretty close. So when that usually actually happens, what I like to do is I actually like to rotate the image and edit it this way and actually post it this way. When I don't have something that's like perfectly symmetrical going up and down, I'll actually just kick it to the side, because you still get that feel of symmetry in those lines leading to this vanishing point, but it's actually harder to tell that the image is not perfectly symmetrical. So the image is a bit dark. I'm going to just increase the exposure a little bit and then go back to color work. And now I'm just going to look at the previews that I have here and begin to pick my favorite filters that I see while I scroll through. A7 is actually really nice. I'm going to remember that. Check out some of these black and whites. I like how dark the blacks are here, so one of these black and whites could play really nicely off that, depending on the actual fade. You can always increase the fade on any of these filters using the tools. This E5 is actually really nice. I love E5. E5 is definitely one of my favorite. Along with F1, both amazing filters. I'm actually going to go with this and go back and sharpen the photo up a bit. I like doing 1 or 2. I don't like going any further than that. I feel like the image begins to look too sharpened. So even here, I can begin to crop it using the 1-on-1. You see, even this left part, this looks perfectly symmetrical. And even here, it looks right, but if I were to flip it this way, it wouldn't. But I even like that square crop. This is something that I would post. If you click on this top right while editing or any part while selecting the photo, you can actually see all of the steps that you made while editing and get only rid of one without having to undo the entire editing process. So I'm actually going to get rid of that exposure. You can edit if you want. I can go back and just do 1 or back to 0 to do 1, but also if I wanted to, I can actually just delete it completely. Go back, see the image. I'm much happier actually without the exposure. Brighten, head back, say OK, get a little check mark, click the arrow, and save the photo to my camera roll. So in this photo, I'm going to go ahead and straighten the photo. If you already look, the photo's actually pretty straight already. I was able to capture it pretty on point. You can see that this line matches really well the lines of the building. This one doesn't really matter as it's just round and actually it'll fit in anywhere. So I'm just trying to make sure that this building is on point. Straightening is definitely one of the most important tools in photography. So if you look at your gallery and all your photos were slightly angled versus completely straight and on point, your gallery would look way more pro. I actually like where my exposure's at. Usually I don't increase the contrast until after I've laid the filter. I don't find any point to add contrast before doing that. There's not a lot of dark shadows happening here, so I don't really need something with any fade or something that's going to smooth out the blacks. I'm just looking for something that's going to create a nice color on the photo. Once again, HB1 is such a good filter. The Hypebeast guys killed it with that. F1 is still my favorite. I do like E5 though. So I'm actually going to go with this A7. I've been a big fan of A7 recently. I think that the preset came on a little too strong, so I'm just going to go ahead and play with it. One thing I like to do is actually bring it back to 0 just to clear my eyes of the filter, and then bring it back at different settings just to see how I like it. Just to refresh your mind, because if you make these little adjustments, from where it's already at, I don't think your eye's able to see that as clearly as if you went all the way back to 0 and started again. Just finalizing my image. This image was already pretty clear, so I'm just going to keep it at a 1. I'm going to increase my contrast a bit actually. Just deepen the blacks a bit, brighten the whites, create a little more contrast between them. Well, then I'm going to click exposure and lower it a bit. So I'm going to click this button and actually see I didn't do that many steps to it to get it the way I want. I feel like less is more when working on these photos, especially iPhone photos. They're easily vulnerable to being blown out and over edited, especially when you're new to photography and new to iPhone photography. So just be conscious, less is more, I think. Once I'm happy with it, just go back, click the check mark, and get this saved to my camera roll and ready to export. So this is one of the shots that I chose as my motion blur shot. Obviously, I'm highlighting that the moving object is still, and the environment around it is blurry. One thing that I like about it is actually the car is still, but the rims you can tell are in motion. One thing that I'm thinking about when I edit this image is that I really want to make the yellow in the photo pop. I'm conscious of the yellow on the taxi, the yellow on the road. I really want to highlight this to complement the taxi along with the yellow that's in the corner of the image on the other taxi. So as I go through my presets, you can see that in the corner, the yellow does become affected by what filter you choose. So I go ahead and pick my favorite filter, the filter that I use quite a bit. Just do my natural settings. The yellow went a little lighter. If you can go back and forth between the edit, you see it's got the kind of this orange yellowish tint to it. But once I put the filter over it, it becomes a lot more of this kind of taxi yellow, but it comes of a brighter yellow. But I can change that in a minute. I'm going to continue and edit the image. I feel like the background back there and the white's a little bit too overexposed, so I'm going to bring it back a bit. Not all the way, but still kind of like the brightness to it. I like my clarity where it's at, because I feel like the shot is already strong, highlighting the taxi, that I don't actually need to add that much clarity to this shot. But I am going to sharpen it a bit more. So here, under hue, saturation, and luminance in Lightroom, I'm actually able to manipulate that yellow and change it to how I see fit, while still keeping the color tones that VSCO provided everywhere else in the photo. So if I want to change that yellow, I can just go to yellow and begin to change the hue. So you can see that everything that is yellow will begin to change. But then I can find that right tone. Then I can even bring down the luminance on the yellow everywhere, but to where the car's tone actually becomes a lot more even. I'm also actually going to brighten the yellow too to help make it stand out that much. For the road here, I'm going to grab this tool, make everything level, except I'm going to increase the saturation a little bit for now, fix everything else, and just kind of go over this line. Patience is a virtue. You can already see the difference when I increase it all the way. How much more that yellow actually stands out. From the left to the right of those lines, I feel like just with the brighter yellow middle, it just complements that taxi that much more. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this all the way through. Before, after. Yeah, one thing that I didn't actually like about it is that I felt like I shot it a little bit too bright, so when I go to edit it, I know I'm going to actually darken this photo a bit. One of my favorite things about it versus the other shots from this is that I love the light trail from the end of the train. Also that you can see the end of the train, that you know it's actually whizzing past you because the lights are going from right to left. And I love that you can actually see that and feel that and know that that's happening because you're telling that story through motion. So of course, first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to lower my exposure a bit. Actually helps to get more clarity of everything that's happening. You see a lot more detail in the wood. The brightness and color of the red from the light trails is a lot more defined. You can just see everything, even the blacks from the shadow of the train, a lot more deep, a lot more colorful. So as I'm going through and cycling through my VSCO filters, I'm looking for something that's really going to complement that red. Right here, this Kodak Portra 400 NC I love that the actual tint, the shadows of the photo are this deep red, which bring out the red in this brick, the red in this brick here, the brick red, not the brick red, but the red on this roof of the train stop, but also the red from the train itself. Bring the highlights back down again, just because when I laid that visco filter on top, it did bring out the whites. It exposed those whites, so I'm just bringing them back down to help taint it, to bring more detail to the photo. Increase my clarity a bit as usual. I love to do that. I think it helps bring out a lot more detail, but also just helps give it this look that I enjoy from my photos. Of course, I'm going to enable the profile corrections. Usually when you do that, you fix that natural vignette from your lens, brightening up your overall image. So always be conscious of that. Always know that that's going to happen, and adjust to that. So I'm actually going to make my image a little bit darker. One thing that I may do is tightening up this crop just a little bit. And I love the way these lines work, where the way this corner, actually this line goes directly into this corner. I love that, but I love the way that they go into the center of the image from top into bottom, all leading into the left, and the train follows that line, that natural movement into the photo. Zero grain, no vignette. I don't want shadows. I'm not trying to highlight anything in the middle of my image. I'm telling the story as a whole. I want everything to be able to be seen. I'm not just trying to highlight something in the middle, but the entire image. One thing that I may adjust is the tone curve again. The blacks are beautiful and deep, but I do want to make them a little flat. So I'm playing with the tone curve, and I'm just lowering the bottom point. Once again, before, after. Huge difference. Completely bright. You don't even get this dark, deep black here quite yet. Until after that. I mean, look at the richness and darkness, and even in the brick of this building. You can see so much more detail. You can see almost every brick now compared to before. So as my second shot to motion blur that I'm going to be editing, I was actually able to capture this on the same train platform. You can see that it's the same red roof. So I'm actually going to go back and copy my visco edit and all the work that I did, except I'm not going to take the crop or any spot removal that I did. You notice that this image is naturally much darker than the one that this was at before. So before, obviously way two different images, but you can see the difference, where this one, the environment around is still, but the motion of the train is a blur. Where here you can see that the front of the train is still. This train is obviously still in motion where the back of the train is moving, because it is a moving object, but you can still get a clear view of this train, the details. You can read that it says CTA. You can read the numbers 304. It just shows you how fast that this train was moving. But I want to actually pair these images up, so I know when I begin editing this, I'm actually going to have to brighten the image. But I'm going to go ahead and paste my edit first. Way dark. So I'm going to go ahead and brighten it up. And I have close to an image that I like. I like that my blacks here are a bit dark. So I'm going to try to adjust accordingly. Yeah, I want to make sure I get as much train as possible, because that is my main subject. But even as I brightened the image, the train actually became that much clearer, and it actually becomes that more isolated. It stands out that much more, especially with the edit. Increasing the clarity, boosting some shadows. Of course, my highlights, once again, are all the way down because I want to show as much detail in the photo as possible, especially when it's blurry, because that naturally is going to take away detail. So the highlights, you're going to help bring it back to help show as much of the story as possible. So for one of my night photography shots, I chose this one as a look-up shot. I really like this building. I just love the detail in it. I actually love that you can read everything that it says. I think it just shows how massive it was and kind of how epic this building was and the detail in it. I think my favorite things about it are these two lampposts. And that's why I actually don't have it. That's why I'm not actually more underneath it, because I want to show as much of the lamppost as I can. I want to show as much detail. And that's why my main focus was those lampposts when I was shooting this. I was focusing on them. Another reason why I chose this is I actually wanted the building to be completely full in this. I didn't want the sky. I actually wanted it to be completely full. So when thinking about the lookup and I was thinking about the sky and the scale, I wanted the scale to show how big it was. I wanted it to be so big that I couldn't fit the top of the building in. And in thinking about the sky, I actually wanted a lack of sky. I didn't want negative space. So even though it doesn't really show sky, I'm still thinking about it and how I want to utilize it in the photo. So first thing I'm always going to do with kind of a night shot is always play with white balance, the color temperature of the photo. Try to get it to a point where I obviously don't want the lights too blue, but I want to get the building back to actually a normal color, a color that I can use as a base to start playing with when looking at other visco filters. So I'm just going to go ahead, look through, find a filter that I think is going to really complement this photo. So I love this filter. Usually with night shots, I always tend to especially deepen my blacks and make them flat. I feel like it helps get rid of a lot of noise. It helps fix just dark night shots. I feel like when I get night shots, I tend to deepen the blacks even more and make them a bit more flat just to help get rid of some noise that may be happening in the photo from the increase in my ISO. So I'm just going to go ahead, increase my clarity, keep my shadows a bit down. I might even lower them. For this particular shot, I'm actually going to add a vignette. Increase my feather a little bit. And just play with my settings. Get something where I like. I really just want this part of the photo highlighted. I don't need the top, really don't need the bottom. This already stands out a lot on its own, and there's already a ton of light hitting, because if you remember, there was a lamp right here just putting a ton of light in this building, and that's when I was really focusing on using the artificial light from that and these lamps to highlight and light this building when I was shooting it. One thing that I like to do, especially for my night photography shots, if changing the white balance and color and temperature isn't enough and there's still a bit too much yellow and orange in there, I'll actually, for shots like this that really yellow and orange isn't serving a priority, I'll actually just take a bit of the saturation away. And you can see in this corner, it just removed all of that yellow. And for me, I'm just going to find kind of a balance where it doesn't look that desaturated, but that yellow is still gone. And for me, it just kind of cleans up the image. I'm actually also going to even bring it down a bit and then move this to the center. You can see the corner of these windows line up with the square, and the top of this is directly right down the middle. Before after. Before, after. So this is another potential shot that I'm going to use under night photography on my shot list. One thing that I like is that the lights are on, and you can see that it's dark. But I'm going to brighten it up a bit just to really show what's happening in the photo, show the detail, but still keeping in mind that I want to keep this vibe that it was shot at night. So before I go ahead and pick a filter, I'm just gonna quickly do some color temperature adjustments. Increase my exposure just a bit more. Remove that grain. Enable profile correction, fixing that vignette and that kind of lens bubble. So again, I'm just going to bring my highlights down. Because it's a night shot, the highlights become way more dramatic. You see when I go up and down. Down, up. Just such a big difference. Increase the clarity. So I'm going to boost some shadows. Because this tire is so black, you really can't see anything that's happening. You do that, actually, it brings a lot more detail in everything that's happening around it. It's got a pretty pink tone. The Visco filter that I'm using right now naturally adds this pinkish tone, but it's kind of naturally pink from the light before, so I'm going to go ahead and change the tint a bit and bring it a little more to the green side. So a lot of orange happening in the photo, and I actually want to get rid of it. So I'm going to go to saturation and find orange and just decrease it. I'm actually going to go all the way to -100 and then just slowly bring it back. And I'll actually kind of do that a couple times and just go back and forth until I find this number that I like. Once I see how I like it, I'll look at the number, then actually go back to 0 and then kind of start over, not looking at the number, finding it how I like it, and then going back. I was 10 off right there from the last time compared to where I liked it. Oh, third time doing it, I was close to the second time. I feel like I'm comfortable with how I like it. Just go ahead and make sure my image is straight. Just making sure that the middle portion of my photo is straight. So I'm worried about this line. I'm also making sure that he is in the middle of this photo. And I'm actually going to bring this image up, giving it some more height, adding some more scale to it. I'd say, like, one of my favorite things about this shot is that it's on the borderline of being nighttime and daytime. You can see that it is kind of bright, but it's also dark out. I'm using my camera in the ISO setting to really brighten up the photo, but you can see even the building lights and the street lights are on. So it's got this really great balance of a night photo and a kind of a daytime photo. So now I have the 4 that I'm going to submit for my class project. One that hits every category. This is my street portrait shot. I love this photo. I think he's perfectly balanced in the middle. I love that the statue is right above him. The rotating doors on both sides, which is really nice. You actually can get even more city in the photo with the reflections that are happening in the glass right above the rotating doors. But I really love this photo. I love the person in it. I love his jacket. I think it's just a lot of vibes that are happening. But also that he's not paying attention to me. He's not seeing what I'm trying to look at or what I'm taking a photo of. You're just capturing this guy in his element. This is the lookup shot that I'm choosing. I love this photo. Crazy wide. I shot this with the 14mm when showing you guys the different focal lengths when shooting lookups using, you know, the 14mm, the 24, the 35, and so on. But I love how much cityscape is fitting in this photo. It looks like a cityscape shot while you're just even on the ground just looking up. I like how much of this building is in here. I love how much of this building reflects onto this glass building. I actually kind of like that this light is on and this one on the left isn't. It's kind of symmetrical but asymmetrical at the same time, breaking up the photo. But I know that even this photo, with how much it's in it, would actually crop really well for Instagram, but also look really great full frame wide. I chose this photo. I love this photo. I love doing this with train shots. I think this is actually a really popular technique amongst photographer and brands. That's why I chose this one. I also love that you can see the end of the train, that you know it's the end of the train because of how clear it is all the way to the right versus how condensed the train is on the left. And then you can see the end of the light trail from the train's lights moving from right to left. That's one thing I like. I also like how the reds really pop out on this photo. And I also selected this as my last shot because I wanted to showcase both types of motion blur. So the other one that I chose was the motion blur where the environment was still and the moving object was a blur, and this one is that moving object as still, where you can see the front of the bus is completely still with the environment around it blurry. But like once again, you can see the 151 Sheridan, that's perfectly readable, legible, clear, along with the front of the bus, even this flag, but everything else around it is blurry. Now that I've selected the 4 photos that I'm going to use for my project, one from each category that we went over, I know my viewers are going to get a great idea of what Chicago looks like through ground level. But now it's your turn. I can't wait to see your cities through your street photography projects on Skillshare.com. Till next time.